work. Professor Subhadra has taught anthropology at the University of Delhi, and her areas of interest have been marginalization and identity, gender, religion and cosmology, ecology, and landscapes. She was a Charles Wallace Fellow to UK and a visiting professor to MSH Paris, a Fulbright visiting lecturer to USA, and a visiting professor to USC in USA. She's written more than 50 scholarly papers and is the author to 8 books. She was the president of the Indian Anthropological Association and has been the editor to Indian Anthropologist, has been the chair of the Commission of Anthropology of Women, and has been elected vice president of IISER. She's also been awarded the S.C. Roy Memorial Gold Medal by the Asiatic Society for lifetime contribution to cultural anthropology. So we're incredibly honored to have you here, ma'am. Before we begin the talk, I request everyone to keep their microphones muted and videos switched off through the session. And I encourage holding on to your questions till the end of the talk or typing them in the chat box for now. I hope we have a few fruitful interactive session towards the end. So now I hand the mic to Dr. Channa, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the Biology Club. And I'm very happy to see a host of young people around because what I am going to talk about today, or rather, let me see the kind of questions that I'm going to raise today, would be very relevant for the generations that are coming. Because, uh, the current status of the globe, and you are all science students, so you are well aware that it is not a happy situation. We would rather be, it would be honest to say that we are in a real mess. We are in a real mess with regard to several things. The environmental issues, which keep cropping up daily in our news, untimely is that, and of course, the loss of biodiversity. I mean, again, you are very much aware of the kind of uh, extraordinary loss. See, there is, as biology students, there is a normal loss of biodiversity, there's a normal loss of species, but then new species come up too. But what is happening in this era, and this particularly these times, and I would kind like to date it. I would like to date it to the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, say the last 300, 400 years. And it is this time period that has significantly altered the face of the earth. It is also a time when humans have, kind of attained a very, at least in their own eyes, they feel that we have really progressed, so to say, or we have developed, so to say, or we have discovered many things, new technologies, communication, smart everything. But at the same time, all these evaluations of progress, of development, of a good life, these are all situated within a particular cognitive framework. Uh, what I'm trying to say is that when we say that we are progressing or we are developing or we are getting advanced, we are saying this in a particular cognitive context as to the meaning of these things. What do they mean? These are, after all, words, these are concepts. They mean something to us. So, what do they mean? They mean some things in a particular frame of reference. And this particular frame of reference, what we call as the cognitive universe, the way we perceive the world, the way we evaluate the world, the way we have certain values put on certain things. What is this system of values that has developed in this past 300 to 400 years from the time of the Industrial Revolution? we are able to say, or we are saying, that we have progressed, we have developed, but we are only saying it in terms of that particular value system only, not there is nothing objective or there is no given truth about any of these concepts. It all depends on how you look at the world. And this way of looking at the world is a perspective, it is a cognition, it is what we call as a cognitive universe, which is constructed. See, I was reading an old article very recently about a British administrator in India. This is about 100-year-old, the article, and he's talking about tribal people somewhere in India, and he says, "Oh, those people are very primitive. They are uncivilized." But why uncivilized? I mean, these are exactly the words that has been used. They are content with what they have. They have no aspirations beyond what you know they can whatever they can use from whatever life they are having. They are very happy with that. They are happy. They are content. They do not have ambitions, and they use very little resources. Now, if I put this in the context of the tensions of today, of all the problems that we are facing today, because we have to face it that okay, we may say we are developed, we are having got good technology, we are advanced, but we have certain issues, and those issues are forever being tensed, being wanting things which we don't have, always having aspirations beyond our means, always, that commodity, the commodification, the market driven aspirational levels, which cause a lot of problems, which is the root of the problem. Because whatever is happening today, and this again, I come back to this particular period, what has, in fact, some geographers have called this the Anthropocene. Anthropocene meaning whatever is happening today. See, in nature, many things happen. You have gone through epochs, there have been mass extinctions, there have been so many things, so many disasters have happened, new life, old life has gone, new life has come. But that has been due to natural causes. You got hit by a meteor or whatever, some famine, some climate change, which is again a normal thing. But this particular epoch has a particularly different character, because whatever is happening today, here, now, is almost, let us say, if not totally, but at least 70% driven by humans, the human species. So we have acquired a kind of a status of being, initiators of certain kinds of transformations. But the my point here is, see, one would be very happy, okay, human species have taken control of the world, they are making all the changes. But where the big question mark and the big issue arises as that humans are not able to control their own consequences of their own actions. See, from the Industrial Revolution onwards, there has been a lot of emphasis placed on technology. But how far has this technology taken us? And to what extent we are able in the present 21st century, say if the Industrial Revolution began somewhere around the 16th to 17th century, by 21st century we are actually finding that technology is not And technology, as we know, it has advanced so much in these 300 to 400 years. But that does not, technology cannot make us prevent glaciers melting, islands going under the sea, major disasters like earthquakes and storms. Believe me, I have personally, I was personally present in New York when Sandy hit New York. And you cannot imagine the level of disaster of the probably the most advanced city in the world, most technologically advanced, one of the richest center of the global economy, and it was devastated. No light, no water, no, and complete breakdown of every facility. I got down at the airport and it was like it was been hit by a bomb. Everything was gone. There was no light. The conveyor belts were not working. We were told to pick up our suitcases, I mean, it's unimaginable. So, what happened? What happened if the most advanced country in the world, the most technologically equipped one, the richest cities in the world could not cope with the natural disaster? It took them at least 15 days to get over that extraordinary crisis, and then many months, and probably some of the damage was never repaired. So what I'm trying to say is that a certain value system is what is really prompting us, what defines these terms for us. What do we understand by development? What do we advertise by progress? In the 17th century there was a intellectual transformation, which for that time was not negative, it was positive. The intellectual transformation was that human beings have reason, they have intellect, and they can take control of their lives. This was in reaction to an age which for Europe we call as the Dark Ages, and which has been probably Dark Ages for quite a few parts of the world, though not especially for the cities and the civilizations, the higher civilizations. That was too much control of religion and religious institutions. I mean, it wasn't that religion, there was anything wrong with religion. It's completely different thing. It was the political control, say for instance in Europe by the church. Uh, and it was a stranglehold. It was somewhere where people's personal liberties were curtailed, where people were not expected to exercise their own religion, only blindly obey. So that it was a breakaway. And of course, there was a witch hunt and lot of killing and murdering and all that. So it was a kind of a reaction, which was positive because it was supposed to have given rise to what we call as the age of reason, where human beings would say, okay, we have brains. But what happened was, it didn't really happen like that. Why it didn't happen like that? Because you see, all human societies, especially complex human societies, are stratified. There are inequalities. And whenever any transformation takes place, even if it is positive, the benefits always go to those who have more power. So every epoch, every, say it, scientific discovery, every technology, every intellectual transformation, it has a differential impact on the people, depending upon who you are, where you are placed, what is your position in the power hierarchy. Now, at that time in Europe, it was a patriarchal society. Men dominated, men ruled. And then All this intellectual transformation was directed towards increasing the power of men rather than being on also over the upper classes, the power holders. They were the ones who consolidated their power, saying what? See, from the gender point of view, it was said that men have reason, women don't. Women were said to have be instinctual. They are the child bearers, the reproducers. But men are the producers. So, beginning of industrial civilization, men, even the existing power of women was taken away from them in that first phase of industrial revolution, because all that was productive, all that was effectively gaining capitalism, industrialization, both these things were captured by the men, at that time by white men, but later on, in as it spread to other parts of the world, it transformed, it increased the patriarchal controls. I'll give you one example. Like, before the industrial revolution, a lot of things were being done by women in their households as part of their household work, say making wine. But during the industrial revolution, when wine making becomes industry, it was totally taken over by the men. Women were told you can make it at home, but when it comes to the industry, when it comes to making money, when it comes to getting power, they were kept out of it. There is a lot of literature on many aspects of this. I won't go into all the details, but this is what happened. So, as society became more progressive, like it became richer, there was discoveries, there were, science developed. Then again, the definition of science, how science was defined. It was defined as rational, objective. But how was rational and objective conceptualized? See, at every point, rational, for example, was conceptualized in a very masculine way. If you have to be rational, you have to be objective. What is objective? You have to be less emotional. You have to look at things unemotionally, objectively, from a distance. And it was also said that these are all the characters of men. What about women? Women are emotional. Women are more concerned with, nurturing, care. They cannot be rational. They are more body. Men are more mind. So, this is how the dichotomy started precipitating more and more, emphasizing already existing inequalities. Society was already patriarchal, but whatever value the women had, it, the it becomes more and more divisive. Similarly, class. So the industries, the discoverers, they were all upper class. If you go into the history, who was Darwin? Who was this? They were all people from the upper classes. In England, for example, the nobility, I mean, they were very constrained of resources, very little land, these are small countries. But there were nobility, there were the men of the upper classes who did not have land, who did not have property, but they had good education because, and then they were the ones who diversified and became scientists, entrepreneurs, and also, very importantly, they became colonizers. European industrialization, and why industrialization takes place in Europe, that is another question. You can ask me, I'll answer later. When Europe became industrialized, Europe is one of the least resourced part of the world. Even if you see today, they have nothing. No minerals, no oil, no gold, no diamond. Nothing is mined in Europe. Nothing is extracted. Practically nothing. And this was just a trading communities. They had only a coastline. They could sail out. That is what they could. They were seafarers. And before they started colonizing, most of them were pirates, basically seafaring pirates. But after industrialization, after they discovered the gunpowder, which was one of the worst discoveries that was made in, it was made in China, but it was usurped by the Europeans. They went out and spread across the world. From the 17th to the 19th century, at least four major continents in the globe changed color, changed skin color. North America, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and also South Africa. This is what we call settler colonies. That is, the European population actually expanded. Today, when we think about somebody from Australia, New Zealand, or the USA, we think of a white person. But none of these countries were white, they were black, dark. But you see, the process of colonization, this genocide that happened, they were literally killed off. It was also had a kind of a philosophical basis within the Renaissance period. That philosophical basis was the opposition of culture to nature. These industrial civilizations, with that whole philosophical transformation of human intellect, human reason, said, okay, I mean, we have reason, we build culture, our lives are culture, meaning civilization, like, having and what was how was civilization conceptualized? It was conceptualized as opposite to nature. So you cut down the forests, natural forests, and you either make cities or you make agricultural fields. you know in the first phase of colonization there has been extraordinarily massive deforestation and natural destruction, because by definition, to be civilized was to conquer nature. Conquest of nature was made technologically possible because human beings had the ability, the reason, the intellect to do it. So it was something very positive. It was to be done because we are humans, because we are men with reason, with intellect, with the power of technological, innovations, which can be used to destroy nature, which was equated as wild, unwanted, abode of uncivilized people. Now, not only were they trying to decimate nature, that is the forest, natural, whatever, mountains, they were also destroying the people who were inhabiting those places. They were not even regarded as human. So when I was talking to you, I mean, I began with biodiversity. But remember, within biodiversity was also human diversity. And human diversity, both in terms of populations as well as in terms of culture, was also destroyed at a very high pace. North America is totally different from what it was in the pre colonial times. The landscape, the species, entire species have become extinct. You don't have the buffaloes anymore, you don't have the prairies anymore, you don't have very few of the Native American physically alive, because tribe after tribe was destroyed, not to the last person. I mean, we as anthropologists, we have read about to the last man in a particular community was brought by one anthropologist to as a specimen. Like you bring a snake or a toad, which is the last or probably the only of species that is going extinct. So these were made extinct by the use of unequal use of power, and they were not considered human, they were considered subhuman. So colonization, this whole spread of a particular population across the globe, was also a way of, transformation of the human population itself. As I said, there was a whitening of the world, which was completely, unprecedented. Today they say that, oh, Asians have so many children, Indians. But what about them? We are at least in sitting in our own country. They spread out all over the world, and obviously then their population didn't grow up in their own countries because they had all gone to other places and colonized them and spread there. No other population has increased the way European population has increased in the 17th century, taking over large parts of the globe for settler colonization. Now, coming to nature. So, nature was shown to be something unwanted and also something that needs to be dominated. Civilization was defined as the domination of nature. And believe me, when they were defining civilization as the domination of nature, which included all the human beings and human communities which they thought were like nature. Like nature mean like animals. You know, when the white people came to New Zealand and Australia, how they defined these continents? These continents were defined as terra nullius. Terra nullius in Latin means empty country. To them, these were empty places. Empty places means devoid of human beings, which means that all the native populations of those places, which were fully populated, mind you, maybe not as densely populated as things are today, but they were fully populated. There were many tribes, many people living there. They were all considered as non human, part of nature, because they lived close to nature. Living close to nature was seen as uncivilized. First, they were considered non human, then, at later stages, as social sciences developed, even anthropology developed, evolutionary theory came up, they were considered as lower stages of human, primitives. This is the word that has been used in our own constitution till very recently. I think only about a decade or two back, they were still using words like primitive tribes and primitive groups, which, after a lot of, interference and protest by anthropologists and social scientists, these words have been removed. So, who were primitives? Primitives were the people who were not civilized. And what was the definition of not civilized? Close to nature. Hmm. So we have these hundreds of years of defining civilization in terms of opposed to nature, of defining men as the creators of civilization, women again close to nature, therefore to be dominated. Nature has to be dominated, women have to be dominated. The worst, the most patriarchal phase of England is during the Victorian era. Of course, they had a queen, but women were subjugated maximum during that era when England ruled practically a good part of the globe. When it was said the sun never went down on the British Empire, that was the worst time for women in British society because the same philosophy. Men dominate. Even today, we have, and these things spread to the world. Society after society, everywhere, people were told if women are dominant, it is a backward society, primitives. So matrilineal societies are primitive, where people are civilized, they should not. British came and they changed our societies. For example, the Nayars, I mean, you people are from Kerala, you know that. They were forced into being patriarchal. When children used to go to school and they used to tell their mother's name, as their lineage, and they were told, no, tell the name of your father. And these all happened in the 20th century. Legally, laws were changed. Women were debarred from being lineage heads and so on and so forth, unless they were primitive. So it was allowed in the tribal societies. Okay, the Khasis can be matrilineal, but how can the Nayars, a higher caste Hindu, who are civilized, they cannot be. So you see how these cognitive empire, how it changed over the world, how certain values. Then the capitalism. Capitalism introduced certain values, which was the commodification of nature. And this actually is the critical part which I wanted to talk to you today, though I have given a long introduction. Commodification of nature is something which totally transforms the human nature relationship. Today, by the end of the 20th century, when things became so bad, when people started realizing that this industrial revolution, this industrial civilization, this capitalist system, this monetary economy, it is not leading to anything good, because by the end of the 20th century, all the environmental disasters had started to come up. Depletion of the ozone layer, global warming, ice melting, everything had started. So then people started going back to the pre capitalist modes of thinking, the cognitive dimensions. And at least in some disciplines like environmentalism, in anthropology, in other, some people started rethinking about that other way of life. How do we today define development? We define development only in material terms. Right about the end, as I said, 20th century, development, they were rethinking about development as only growth, as only capitalist growth, as only in terms of money, only in terms of market. So a new term which was introduced again by a woman was sustainable development. Today we have human development index. Things are changing. Things are changing because this, it was, a realization that came rather a little too late. So it began around the Second World War, because at the time of the Second World War, that whole definition of science as being objective, as being value free, that started being critiqued, because Second World War was the time of maximum scientific development within the shortest period of time. But it was only made possible because of the war, because of the extraordinary human cost, as well as the depths to which humanity could fall. You know, the kind of things that were happening in the concentration camps, that kind of genocide, the kind of what was done in the name of science, the kind of inhuman experimentation, all that came into light. And then the questions were being began. What is science? What is the scientific methodology? What do we mean by objectivity? Is it possible to have a value free science? Today we realize it's not. You cannot have a value free science, because as biologists, there are so many issues. Eugenics happened when people were, you know, entire populations were targeted, because there was some theory that there is, you can have a better genetic population, you can have a better population if all people are more genetically fit. You know how shocking it is. I was reading that in Germany, parents used to give up their children to be killed because they thought that these children were not genetically perfect, that there was something wrong with them. They were not intelligent enough, or they were not athletic enough, or there was some defect in them. I mean, this was the kind of mindset that had developed at that time, which said that okay, for the sake of science we will do it was said we will do this, we will do that. If we want to have, for the sake of the nation, we want to have a genetically perfect population, we'll kill our own children. So this kind of situation really led to a lot of philosophical rethinking. German philosophers, Horkheimer, so many people, Adorno and all, that the whole thing about what is humanity about? What is science about? And then there was also the critique of a particular form of science. Today we call it Western science. Because earlier it was the science. Science meant only what was being propagated from the West. Though also West had also borrowed it from, say, medical science. Now, most of what is modern medical medicine came from the Middle East, and from Middle East it was transformed into some kind of an European system, and then propagated all over the world as Western, which it wasn't really. So the whole issue was that, and again, why has a particular form of science or a particular form of medicine or a particular form of thinking was shown to be the only form? So when you are talking of science, you have to follow the scientific method. A scientific method, the Cartesian duality, the separation of all this came from a particular source, which then was considered as the only source, the only truth, very much critiqued by the 20th century. But at that time, for those 200-300 years when colonization was spreading, and today we realize that it was, and which has been very explicitly said by philosophers, Foucault, and also a lot of feminist scholars, that what is accepted as truth or what is accepted as knowledge is only done so because it is backed by power. Two people are saying two different things. Say, the Native Americans said, or our Aboriginal population said, or the Brazilian tribes are saying that nature is alive. Nature has consciousness. Nature is just like human beings. A tree is alive, a river is alive, it has character, it has soul. When tribal people, even when they hunt, after hunting, they pray for the soul of the animal that they have hunted. They ask forgiveness. They say, please forgive us, we have killed you for food, but we pray that your soul. They perform death rites for the animals that they have killed. They don't treat them like objects, they don't treat them like meat. They don't treat the today as the food factories treat animals, how they are just being raised as as objects, as non-conscious beings. But in the tribal areas, it's not that they were vegetarians, but they killed, yes, because that they understand is the way life goes. You have to eat, but they will not kill unnecessarily. There were a lot of norms about killing. Killing for sports did not exist anywhere in the pre-civilizational world, in what we call today as. So these were alternative forms of knowing. Huh? There were different epistemology. How do you know? The Aboriginals would say that you know spiritually. Our ancient sages used to say that you know through meditation. Today, but we were told no, we have to use the objective method. You can only know through experimentation, through this, through that. Then the critiques actually came from within science itself, but the critiques also came from changes in the power structure. Obviously, after decolonization, you have alternative power structures. Though it didn't change so easily, because for a long time, who were the third world? The third world was the earlier colonized people. Who were the first world? The first world were the people who were colonizing. So it didn't change, but it's changing slowly. It is still changing slowly. Today we have different, alternative power. the shifts in the world. And as the power is shifting, we see that the cosmologies are shifting, ways of thinking are shifting. Today, if you go to the USA, you will find people who are practicing Tibetan medicine, Chinese medicine, who are going for shamanism. Shamanism has become very popular in the West. People go to shamans for so many things. People are talking of alternative systems of medicine. So why? It is not that these things weren't there before, but earlier, like I said, if you have A and B, and A says that nature is sacred and nature is holy and nature has consciousness, that was that person was told, or that community was told, you are ignorant, you are primitive, you are uncivilized. Why? Because of the power, because they were the dominated, they were the colonized, they were the natives. Even within the countries, you have inside countries, you have internal colonization. People are marginalized. As I said, women were told you have no knowledge, you don't know anything. By the in 19th century, for example, in Europe, something which is so feminine, like childbirth, all agency was taken away from the midwives and given to the male doctors by saying that a gynecologist has to be a man. Midwives are ignorant, but those midwives have been delivering children for centuries. The men came in only in the 18th century and they displaced all the midwives. Childbirth became something for which you went to hospital and you were attended to you by a male gynecologist. So you see the shift in power. The shifting power defines things. This is what I'm trying to tell you. That what we call development, what we call progress, it was defined in terms of certain cognitive systems, certain ways of looking at the world. And those ways of looking at the world were totally linked to power hierarchies. Why? Everything, for example, during the colonial period, nobody, like my mother, she did not have any faith in Ayurveda or Veda. She used to say all that is superstition because that is what the British told her when she went to school. So it was only the, what we call the Western system of medicine. What the doctor says is right, everybody else is wrong. Today we no longer say that. Today, even because India's power equation has changed, the Indian system of medicine is being reinstated. Ayurveda is now, you have Ayush in the government hospitals. In our childhood, till the time I was growing up, in fact, a few decades back, nobody even think of into having Ayurveda in a hospital, that to a state-run hospital. No. Why? How did it become? I mean, the same system was sometimes a superstitions, a non-system, a non-knowledge. Then another era, another time period, it becomes knowledge, it becomes effective. And that is all because of power. So, what we understand as science, it is being critiqued. And you see, what is one form of critique? How do we understand what is knowledge? How do we understand that this is right and this is wrong? There are no objective ways of understanding. But one very, what you say, the taste of the pudding lies in, the um, value of the pudding lies in its taste. How it tastes. Hmm? So if the pudding tastes good, it is good. So if a system works, it is good. What happened to all this industrial capitalist system? It is not working, and we are in that phase when it is not working. So people are looking for alternative modes of knowledge, alternative ways of development. Development from capitalism has now become sustainable development goals. Human, nobody talked of human, human values or being things like gender equality, child. These were not considered as part of development a few decades back, but now they are, because people are realizing that okay, we did a mistake. It was a mistake. From World War II, people started realizing that their making science into a god, and that to a particular kind of science, was wrong. It is not a god, it is just one of the ways in which we can understand the world. There are other ways to do it also. There are other ways to have a good lifestyle than to have, unlimited wealth, which nobody has understood as yet. But these are at least some places, some people have started to think like that. So, this questioning, this critiquing, this understanding that, and it also comes from within science because physics now tells us that, okay, we know very little. At one time, by the 18th century, people were very proud, very elated that, oh, we have become gods, we have become scientists. By the end of the 20th century, they realized that we know very little. Today's physicists will tell you about the dark universe. They will tell you that a lot of things which they thought was right is wrong. Today, biology is talking of, how you understand animals, for example, how you understand birds and fish. They are not completely opposed to humans. Today, new research is telling us there is a lot more continuity. I mean, we are all animals, but it was considered that the human species is somewhat different, it is very superior, but now we are saying no. They also have sentiments, intelligence, cognition, consciousness, and more research is of course going on, but I'm sure the biology students understand that the way flora and fauna, the non-humans were conceptualized, is changing within science, and it was always different in the non-western or the non-capitalist industrial world. It was, they always thought like that. We, like for in our Indian system, we thought differently. We thought that a river can be sacred, a tree can be sacred, concept of sacred grows and so on and so forth. So what, as in the contemporary world, we need to understand is that rethink rethink the concepts and try to understand why this exists. What is the political, social context of science? That is very important to understand. Because without that, science becomes can become a monster, like it became a monster. It has become like, we have all inhuman experimentations, and lot of things are being critiqued now. So there is some questions. Let's see how you people react.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask about like you said like um, there is a reason why that industrial revolution happened in Europe and it
Mm,
happened
mm.
among white people, and then I want to know like why like
Yeah,
when there
it
was
is actually, there are, of course, these are all historical accidents, but there is a theory. See, civilizations began. I mean, Europe was the last place to get civilized. Civilizations began in the Middle East first, then it and in places like South. Mostly, like if you read Carl Wittfogel's book on Oriental despotism and others also about there are many theories of state formation, how states form, how civilizations, because civilization is related to a social differentiation, what we call civilization, that is the beginnings of urban civilization. Before that, people are very equal. Everybody is doing work in their fields or living in the forest, and society is undifferentiated. It is not complex. Civilizations are founded on inequality. And this comes for various reasons. Ecological, because where you have large rivers, Then there was this whole thing about irrigation. You could grow more food. And if you grow more food, you will have a surplus. And a surplus can support a non-working elite, a non-productive elite. And this is from where actually the social differentiation starts between the producers and the non-producers, the surplus and the ecological conditions or the environmental conditions for the production of surplus. So it's actually very, very complex and lots of theories are there. Europe lagged behind because Europe had no natural resources. They have small rivers. Where you had the large river basins, these are called hydraulic civilizations. See, Mesopotamia was on the Euphrates River, which changed course later. Then you have the Yellow River, China, Chinese civilizations, the Indus Valley civilization on the confluence of the five rivers. Then, like this, the big river basins, the Gangetic Plain, then developed. You needed a large source of water because in those days there was initially no technology, only naturally available water. Then began the technologies of dam making, irrigation, control of water. So most civilizations and their social differentiation started with the control of water as a resource. So like that, societies became differentiated into specialized people, people who had ability to control others, like so. And in Europe, yeah. So Europe doesn't have any big river. You go to any country, they have very small rivulets. Even their topography is very fragmented. The Alps and all, mountains, small rivers. So it didn't have the scope for developing those like the Nile. If you see those flat, large basins, Europe doesn't have the ecological conditions for the development. So it came in the second phase. It began, as I said, internally through because they didn't have natural resources. There's no river, no water, no mineral, no. They had to work on their own abilities. Like, what can we do? So they began, this industrial revolution, discovery of the steam engine. People, for example, China. Chinese always thought that they were the most superior people of the world. They had everything. When somebody asked the emperor of China, not this earlier one, where do you like to go out of China? He said, what? I leave paradise? Because they had everything. Big, means so much of production of food, water, wealth, nothing was deficient. Europe was driven to industrial civilization because of its deficiencies, because it didn't have anything else. And that also drove them to colonization. Because once they had the industry, they had nothing, no material to feed the industries. So they had to go out and exploit the resources of other countries. So it is ecological, historical. Of course, there are historical accidents. It is social because, as I said, there was such a deficit of resources in England and Europe that inheritance was very poor. If there were four sons in a family, only one could get the estate because estates were so small they couldn't be divided. What does the other three do? The other three go to Oxford, Cambridge, get a good education. Then they either went out on the sea to look for other countries, other opportunities, or they sat in their libraries and their rooms and they started thinking. So they developed that way.
I think Gati Krishna has a question.
Hmm.
If you want to say it.
Yes, thank you, ma'am, for such a nice talk. And my question was like little scientifically connected. So nowadays, like in the labs, we keep animals for tasting whatever we send to the market. Before that, we do the animal trials. And
Mm-hmm.
since like the types of pathogens are also evolving, and we also are trying to have like more human like cells or human like organisms for trials.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think is this as an, like, if we start having human lab rats, if we say, how will it affect the uh, society as a whole?
Yeah, these are very deep questions, and this genetic modification, this interference with biology, even artificial insemination, and there are a lot of this genetically modified, even lab animals being created. So, what are the ethics and values of it? How much we should interfere with nature? And sometimes, like people say that COVID-19 it happened because of some leakage from a lab. I mean, we don't know the truth of it, or but it does certainly has happened because of the changes in the human nature interaction, because that has changed the kind of distance that we should have maintained from nature, we have not, or the kind of interaction we should have had controlled, like it happens in the tribal communities. As I said, there is a controlled interaction, we don't have it. So when things go wrong, then we will know. They are not going wrong. It is we have. I mean, see, ethics again is both personal and cultural, though, because I know that a lot of ethics about experimentation on animals has changed. When we were kids, when we were in school, we used to dissect animals. Nowadays, the children do not dissect animals. Even the zoology department has no animals to dissect unless under very special, they have to get special permission, this and that. So things have changed. If you hear about the kind of experiments that they used to do on animals earlier, I mean, today, I mean, there would be like a worldwide, protest starting. But at that time, they used to do it because they never attributed any consciousness to the animals. But today we do. So these are difficult
Yes, ma'am.
questions, yeah. It's a
Hmm.
very difficult
And
question to answer because it also depends. I remember I read somewhere about this woman, German. She was a German. I read this in a magazine. She was a scientist, a student, and then they at that time were experimenting on animals. So there was something that had to be done, some experiment, and for that she needed to have a dog. So she bought a puppy, and then she was raising it only for experimentation. While she was doing it, she developed an emotional bond, as with the puppy. And then she realized and she said, I just couldn't do it. So she left that scientific experiment. She stopped being a scientist, became an animal lover. She completely changed as a person. So it all depends, at the personal equation. People change, not bring themselves to do it. Some people do it, they don't care. So it all depends. Very complex things to answer, actually. I don't think there is any answer, but I certainly know that if someday things go wrong, then of course there will be hindsight that it should not have been done. But as
yes, ma'am.
long as that
And
doesn't happen,
should I tell or no?
hmm?
Should
Yeah, Gati, you can finish what you have to say.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, like I was asking, the whole concept of nowadays, what the concept of humanity is like doing everything very perfectly, right? So, what if some superior species come, like human only, but some superior beings come someday and try to deselect people who are on the genetic basis, which who are weak, or let's say uh,
This has
somewhat
already been done. I already talked to you. This was called eugenics. It happened also. It happened in Germany, as we know, the mass
oh,
genocide. That
hmm,
because those people thought that they were a superior race, they actually wanted to kill everybody who they thought was of an inferior race. And I said that even of that race, even parents were handing over their children they thought were not perfect. It has already happened in world history.
Okay.
You know,
Thank you,
in the
ma'am.
USA, routinely women who went for small things like a cough or a cold or a small minor ailment and who were like Afro American or who were not white and all were routinely sterilized, even without their knowledge, without their permission. So these things have happened, they are still happening. You think when they start testing, I mean, this happens a lot, for example, in stratified, racially stratified countries like USA, it happens all the time. And some of it is brought out, some of it is not. That when you have a dangerous drug, you use it on all the people you think are, racially inferior, marginalized, immigrants, poor immigrants. There was this very famous French doctor who's known as the master of surgery, very famous doctor. I mean, his work is. But he used to experiment on poor immigrant women. When these poor women used to come, he used to keep them in their house because they were destitute, they had no money, and he would perform any kind of operations on I mean, a single woman. Sometimes 20 operations were performed just for his research. So these things have already happened and they are still happening. You don't need an outside race to come and do it inside. It is happening in country after country. Only thing is that they are not always known, not to the general public.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, we have one question in the chat box. Mohammed Naseem K
Yeah,
says, you talked about how power defined the dominant narratives. How are the less powerful perspectives sometimes pushed mainstream?
absolutely. Because if it was only about dominance, the society would go only in one direction, no? So we do have, of course, the discourses from the bottom, from the margins. We have protest, we have resilience. Human beings, thankfully, a lot of capacity to protest and to be resilient and to have, go against the dominance. That is how civilizations changed, empires went away, colonization went away. Even today, societies are changing, as I said. Different perspectives are coming in. Yes, the less powerful also have a voice, but they have different ways of expressing it, and they can be very effective at times.
So I believe, okay, we have a question from Sharika. You can go ahead and ask.
Ma'am, you talked about how during the Industrial Revolution, even uh, when there was a positive shift, it always favored those was in power, like the patriarchal society.
Hmm.
Like even now, as we are going through positive change, how do we prevent like something like that happening again? Like how do we stop like the benefits going primarily to
It
ones
is
who are
not
power right
happening,
now?
unfortunately, Sharika. Is it happening? All we
Um,
are seeing in this world is that disparities are growing more and more. And a lot of the trouble in this world is because of the disparities, because wealth is concentrated in so few hands, power is concentrated. So it is not really happening. How we do it remains an open question.
thank you.
But of course, every one of us can protest at their own level, try to do something. And supposing we hope that, and that is what people hope for. When we had that 99% protest in USA, that people said all the wealth is in the hand of the 1% of Americans, and 99% of them are not part of that. So they did protest. So it's it's like If you look into history, protests have been there, transformations have been there, but then things keep going back. Doesn't last very long. What can we do?
That that's also what I wanted to ask about. When you say like there is like power, I mean like there is even the powerless can be heard. Like what extent is it true? Like even now we're seeing positive action taken on
Yeah, you
climate
see,
change,
things they
but so,
women, for example, let us say now, women were totally out of everything during the Industrial Revolution. But they fought and they came back slowly, 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 slowly. You know, I was reading this article, this paper, book by Virginia Woolf, who was a very famous writer, who is world famous, one of the best. And she said that she went to Oxford University. And when she went to Oxford University, she wanted to borrow a book from the library. And she was told, even at that time, she was an established, very well known writer. She was told that, sorry, madam, women are not allowed into the library. And she had to get hold of some young student and ask him to get the book for her. So you see, but that was not so far back. Also, Virginia Woolf was there in the I mean the uh, beginnings of the 20th century. See, so in 100 years, a lot of things have changed. I mean, there are inequalities still, but then some of the inequalities have changed. Look at the position of Afro Americans in the USA. I mean, bad, but much improved from what it was before. Gender equality, still not perfect, but much better than what it was before. Other forms of inequalities are coming in, but still, you see, there are efforts, protests, the marginalized groups are getting a voice. So things are changing. They do change. New forms of oppression come up. That's another thing. But some things do get rectified.
thank you.
So, do we have any other questions from the audience? If not, I think we can wrap the session
We
up,
can
ma'am.
wrap up.
Thank you
Yeah.
for the talk. It was truly insightful. So, as students of a science institute, sometimes we delve too deep into the science and we tend to ignore the bigger picture of humanity and the consequences of what we do. So, I feel like this talk really made us think about these things. I would like to thank everyone who attended this talk and actively involved in the interactive session. I'd also extend my gratitude to our faculty advisor, Dr. Sadananda Singh, and the School of Biology of IISER for hosting this session. So I wish you all a very good day. So I'll meet you all on the next session. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.